was an unyielding soldier, a revolutionary statesman. In 1915 at Gallipoli, he handed the British one of the most devastating defeats in their history. In 1918, he emerged from World War I as the only undefeated Ottoman commander. 4 years later, he led his people in their struggle against the invading Greek forces and won back their independence. In 1923, on the ruins of the defunct Ottoman Empire, he founded and became the first president of the Republic of Turkey. The secular country he created became a member of NATO and a symbol of democracy in the Middle East. Stalin considered him a fascist. Hitler and Mussolini said he was a communist. Others called him a dictator. His people called him Ataturk, Father Turk. The mighty Ottoman Empire. This multinational, multilingual dynasty for centuries was the most glorious, most feared empire of the world. At its height, under the rule of Solomon the Magnificent in the 16th century, the empire encompassed southern Europe, Arabia, Near Asia, and North Africa, threatening the gates of Vienna. By late 19th century, the glorious days of the Ottomans were distant memories of the past. Lagging behind the progress in the rest of the world, the empire was ridiculed by the Western powers as the sick man of Europe. After an unsuccessful attempt in constitutional democracy in 1876, the Ottoman Empire became more autocratic and theocratic under the rule of Abdul Hamid II, Caliph and Sultan. Caliph, the head of the Muslim world, Sultan, head of state. Abdul Hamid transformed the country into a police state and ruled with merciless authority for 33 years. Into this theocratic and despotic rule, rising tide of nationalism and internal unrest, Ataturk was born as an Ottoman. He would die a Turk. Salonika, this crucial European port city of the Ottoman Empire, was composed of Jews, Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and other Balkan Christians. Zubeyde Hanim and her husband, Ali Riza Effendi, lived in the Turkish region of this cosmopolitan city. In 1881, after the deaths of all three previous children, they experienced the birth of a son.
Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was born into a house of mourning, house of death.
His mother was young and that she had had children before he was born, and the children had died, and he was what in psychological terms would be called a replacement child. And in being a replacement child, he was extremely special, very special to his mother, very special role in the family.
The second major event outside of early mother-child relationship was the father's death, and before his death giving his son a gift.
His mother, who was a much more religious person, who was known sort of as a mullah, that she could always discourse on religious themes, wanted him to go to the local school in the mosque and perhaps follow a religious career and become an alim or a qadi or something like that. His father wanted him to go to a newly opened Western school. So they enrolled him, his father enrolled him along with his mother for the first day in the local religious school, and then took him out and put him in the Western school.
Mustafa's father changed not only the destiny of his son, but also that of the Turkish nation. Seeing the difference between religious and Western schools, Mustafa came to value modern education and intellectual freedom. After hardships and stints in other schools following his father's death, Mustafa, now referred to as Mustafa Kemal, entered the Monastir Military Training School in 1895. His first time away from home, Monastir made him aware of the larger situation outside of school and in the European section of the empire.
Young Mustafa Kemal was exposed to ethnic diversity. He was exposed to ideas of nationalism. He was exposed to Western and Jewish cultures.
At school, he secretly began to devour the banned works of famous French philosophers and the patriotic Turkish poet Namık Kemal. The young Mustafa Kemal began to think of realistic solutions for the despotic condition of the country and its bleak future. Foreign agents, fueled and guided by the great powers, were provoking the minorities against the empire. In this imperial arena of intrigue and betrayal, Mustafa Kemal could not stop nationalistic and patriotic feelings from boiling inside of him. In 1899, Mustafa Kemal graduated to the Imperial War College in Istanbul. The capital of the empire, Istanbul, was divided between the primitive region inhabited by the Turks and Pera, where the rich foreigners and the minorities lived. Controlling the empire's economy and internal affairs, the foreigners had formed an unshakable dominion, while the Turks were forced to live like prisoners within their own land. No criticism of the Sultan was allowed. Corruption was rampant. Friend would turn against friend. Brother could turn against brother. The Imperial War College was no exception. Overcrowded by thousands, lacking sanitation, and crawling with the spies of the Sultan, the pathetic conditions of the school overwhelmed the cadets.
It was a new environment for him. He had no friends at the beginning, and he lapsed into periods of depression, which he came out of easily once he made some friends, and among those friends, of course, was Ali Fuat Cebesoy.
Under the increasing despotism of the Sultan, Mustafa Kemal despised tyranny and became more concerned with freedom and the ways to achieve it.
When Mustafa Kemal and Ali Fuat were cadets at the War College, they secretly published some papers to do with the situation, the pathetic situation of the Ottoman Empire.
He began to dominate his circle with his ideas on the future of the empire. Mustafa Kemal was becoming more political. He was also becoming more ambitious. He viewed himself as the savior of the country.
He and his friends would sit around in the cafes, and Kemal would tell them about what would happen in their future, and he would organize the government, and they would all have ministries, but he would be the head man.
After graduating from the Staff College in 1905, Captain Mustafa Kemal was imprisoned temporarily for publishing illegal papers. A marked soldier, he was exiled to Damascus. He was only 24. During his 3-year exile in Damascus, Mustafa Kemal witnessed the corruption within the army and the resentment in the subjects of the empire. He was a loner in Damascus, battling with depression and insomnia due to the pathetic situation that engulfed him. He realized that change could not be achieved by force alone, but had to be methodical, well-founded. He and his friends formed a secret organization named Motherland and Freedom, with the motto, "Where there is no freedom, there is death and extinction. Freedom is the only solution." Acting before Mustafa Kemal, the Committee of Union and Progress, another secret organization whose members included many officers of the army, revolted against the Sultan in 1908 and restored the constitution he had abolished 31 years before. Having been forced to merge his organization with that of the committee, Mustafa Kemal had only a sideline seat in this historic event, which has come to be known as the Young Turk Revolution. Disillusioned with his role in the revolution, Mustafa Kemal immersed himself in his career. He wrote and translated military books and began to devise strategies for the empire's defense against a possible attack from the Balkans. His reputation began to spread as a highly competent military strategist and field commander after his services in Salonika, Picardy, and Tripoli.
Ataturk was a brilliant soldier. He was able to appeal to the common soldier, but he did not get along with his senior officers because when he felt they were wrong, he told them so. As a result of that, the senior people in the army constantly wanted to get Mustafa Kemal as far away from them as they could.
With the rising conflict in Europe, Kemal was aware of the approaching World War. Realizing the plans of the Western powers to dismember the empire, Mustafa Kemal insisted on staying neutral. He was ignored. For many years, he had been waiting for his moment to come. World War I would give it to him. Despite Mustafa Kemal's warnings, the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire against the Triple Entente of Great Britain, Russia, and France. After the standstill in the Western Front, all eyes turned to the east.
The Russians at the end of December 1914 were under great pressure in the Caucasus, and they sent a message asking the French and the British if they could do something to help draw Turkish forces away from the Caucasus. And this was the final catalyst in precipitating what became the Dardanelles and ultimately the Gallipoli campaigns.
With the strong lobbying of Winston Churchill on February 5, 1915, the British government ordered an attack to force the Dardanelles and capture Istanbul. Only 3 days before, Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal was posted to the Gallipoli Peninsula in command of the 19th Division. An event going unnoticed at the time was to change the outcome of the whole campaign. Just a few miles from the ancient city of Troy lay the Straits of Dardanelles and the Gallipoli Peninsula, which had witnessed the legends of Alexander the Great and Jason and the Argonauts. The straits linked the Aegean Sea to Istanbul, which was connected to Tsarist Russia by the Bosphorus. The historical question of Napoleon remained: who will hold Istanbul? March 18th. Assembling the greatest naval armada witnessed by the Mediterranean, the Allies began their attack on the Dardanelles. Just when the ships seemed headed for a breakthrough, disaster struck. Under heavy bombardment from the Turkish forts, the French Bouvet, the British Irresistible, and Ocean hit the mines laid by a Turkish ship named Nusrat and sank. At the end of the battle, 3 ships had been sunk, while 3 others were put out of commission. In return, nothing was achieved. The great, formidable British Navy had suffered an astonishing defeat at the hands of the sick man of Europe.
After the British attempt to force the Narrows was set back on the 18th of March, both the naval commander, Admiral John de Robeck, and the military commander, General Sir Ian Hamilton, realised that it would be necessary to make a landing to clear the European shore of the peninsula before the Navy could resume the attempt to sweep the Narrows.
Hamilton and his staff immediately began to devise plans for what was to be the greatest, most ambitious landing operation in world history until Normandy in World War II. After a month of careful planning, the Allies, under the protection of their naval bombardment, landed at Gallipoli on the morning of April 25, 1915. the Australian and New Zealand troops, referred to as the Anzacs, landed at Ariburnu, known today as Anzac Cove. Not encountering any significant Turkish resistance, the Anzacs proceeded inward up Çanak Bear.
Mustafa Kemal left the men that had come with him and moved down the hills towards Çanak Bear, where he found the small number of defenders moving back from the advancing Australians. He took the defenders, the Turkish forces, and he said to them, "You must turn and fight." And despite the fact that they complained they had no ammunition, he made them stop, put on their bayonets, lie down, and that in itself was enough to arrest the Australian movement northward up the hills.
While the Anzacs hesitated, Mustafa Kemal's troops reached the area, and he engaged them in action, with himself fighting at the forefront. He knew that his chance to be the savior of his country had finally come. He would either prove to the world who Mustafa Kemal was, or would die trying. His fighting with fanaticism and readiness to die made his soldiers die on his orders. "I don't order you to fight, I order you to die. In the time it takes us to die, other troops can come and take our places." At the end of the day of fierce fighting and bravery on both sides, the Anzac advance had been stopped and Çanak Bear secured.
The way that he managed to keep it within Turkish hands on the 25th of April was in fact a defining moment of what took place at Anzac.
Becoming a full colonel in June, Mustafa Kemal was put in command of the whole northern front in August. On the morning of August 10th, during his decisive attack against the Anzacs, an event took place that was to change Mustafa Kemal forever.
In the course of the battle, shrapnel shell exploded and he was hit with a piece of shrapnel above the heart, but fortunately the shrapnel lodged in his watch, which he had in his breast pocket, and so he was not seriously wounded.
After this event in Gallipoli, there occurred a fit between internal belief that he was immortal and external event proving that he was immortal. And so he became more cohesive internally, so that he could do what he did later on with more ease.
Convinced of his own immortality, Mustafa Kemal began to walk freely in trenches under heavy fire, creating a legend for himself among his troops. After Mustafa Kemal's charges on August 9th and 10th, not a single strategic hill was in Allied hands. The mighty British Empire had been defeated at Gallipoli. Winston Churchill lost his position as First Lord of the Admiralty. Mustafa Kemal's reputation spread among his colleagues and the people.
He demonstrated both on the 25th of April and again in August that he had a driving ruthlessness which the British commanders often lacked. They weren't prepared to drive their men as hard as he was. He acted with decision and vigour and prevented the potential of an attack from opening out. And I think at those 3 points, you could say he managed to turn the tide of those particular battles. And in that way, through doing it 3 times, he would emerge as the leading character from the whole campaign.
Mustafa Kemal came to Gallipoli outcast by his government and left as a national hero. Unfortunately, the Ottoman victory at Gallipoli could not prevent the inevitable. the situation of the Ottoman Empire and her allies deteriorated rapidly. Defeat seemed certain. The Entente powers had already started to make plans to splice the empire, with Italy, France, England, and Greece all waiting for a share of the spoils. After his service in Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal was promoted to general. He continued to fight as an army commander in the east against the Russians and in the southeast against the British forces. October 30th, 1918. The Ottoman Empire, with a new sultan, surrendered to the British at the island of Mudros. With the cooperation of the sultan, the Allies immediately began to invade different regions of the country. The same day that the Allied fleet sailed into Istanbul, Mustafa Kemal returned to the capital.
He was the only Ottoman commander that never suffered a defeat during World War I. And it was as a result of that that he had a tremendous reputation among the mass of the people. He added to that reputation because as soon as the armistice was signed, he openly and vociferously declared that it was unfair to the Turks and should never have been signed.
Looking at the anchored enemy ships and feeling disgraced, he said, "As they have come, so shall they go." Turkish struggle for independence had started. Realizing that the situation in Istanbul was hopeless, Mustafa Kemal decided that the salvation lay in Anatolia.
Anatolia was largely Turkish at this time. And he felt that if the Turks were going to resist the Allies, it had to be from the heartland of the Turkish people, namely in Anatolia, that this resistance could be organized.
As Mustafa Kemal made preparations to embark on his journey to Anatolia, the British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, authorized and supported a Greek landing on the western coast of the country, in Izmir, on May 15, 1919.
The Greeks, in secret consultation with Lloyd George, agreed that this would not be temporary, but would be a permanent occupation. And to make sure of this, when they landed at Izmir, instead of simply taking nominal control, they began large-scale massacres of the Turks and the Jews who lived there in order to encourage them and also the Turks and Jews living elsewhere in Western Anatolia to flee as they did.
4 days after the Greek landing, Mustafa Kemal landed on the Black Sea coast of the country.
The Turks were in a very difficult position. The Greeks had occupied all of Thrace and southwestern Anatolia. The Italians had occupied southern Anatolia. The French had occupied southeastern Anatolia, so-called Cilicia, as well as Syria. And others had occupied northeastern Anatolia. At the same time, the British had maintained a blockade of Anatolia, which resulted that no food could be imported from outside. While at the same time, agriculture in Anatolia was almost at a standstill and there was no transportation. With the result, there was no food, no fuel, no clothing. People were starving. People were dying as a result of famine.
Given the circumstances under which they had to operate and the challenges they were facing, that I know of no other military leader that faced such formidable challenges as Ataturk.
Gaining the support of his friends and people all around Anatolia, Mustafa Kemal decided to set the seat of the provincial government and open a parliament in Ankara. While Mustafa Kemal was busy organizing a regular Turkish army and establishing the principles of their struggle, the Greeks were advancing further east towards Ankara.
As Mustafa Kemal withdrew the national forces, which means the local guerrilla forces, back to Ankara in order to organize them into a regular organized army, there were many people in the Grand National Assembly who criticized Mustafa Kemal on the grounds that he was being defeated, that the Turks were losing their nation, and that instead of withdrawing forces, he should stand and fight.
Things looked very bleak for Mustafa Kemal. The Sultan sent an army of sorts to fight the nationalists. There were rebellions and mutinies all over Anatolia in response to the Sultan's call to kill Mustafa Kemal.
Mustafa Kemal drew strength from hopelessness and despair. His determination, self-confidence, and will for freedom since childhood enabled him to work restlessly and with great vigor. Spending endless hours at the parliament, he explained the situation and his goals to the deputies. Freedom and independence are my character. I put it as the main condition that my country should have the same characteristics. In order for me to live, I should be the child of a free nation. Thus, the national sovereignty is a matter of life for me. He went on together with his comrades to organize an army that would stop the Greek advance. Two incidents, one personal, the other political, were to affect the course of his life. Fikriye, a woman with whom he had become intimate in Istanbul, could not endure their separation and decided to join him in his struggle.
She was a very traditional Muslim girl who falls in love with her hero, comes to Ankara and functions as his wife and woman and makes a home for him.
Fikriye adored Mustafa Kemal, and he enjoyed being the center of her affection. Although not married, they seemed like the perfect couple, or so thought Fikriye. Time would tell what Mustafa Kemal thought. In the political arena, the Allies forced the Istanbul government to sign the Treaty of Sèvres on August 10, 1920.
The result was a treaty which, if carried out, would have given the Turks independence in a small part of central Anatolia, would have left the rest of Anatolia, containing primarily Turks, either under control of the Allied powers or under the control of an Armenian and a Greek and Kurdish states.
Mustafa Kemal knew that the time had come to rally the people and carry the struggle to victory. Receiving the title of Supreme Commander, he went about organizing the Turkish army with unprecedented energy and ruthlessness. I had to interest the Turkish nation in the war in all their actions, their sentiments, and their conceptions. Every single individual in the village, in his home, in the fields, had to consider himself in the same way as those fighting at the front.
He not only could fight the army and command it, but he had to build it. And he had to get some acceptance from the Turkish people, and he had to generate resources, and he had to design equipment, and he had to train the entire organization from scratch. That's really, in my judgment, a tremendous accomplishment.
After the Greek armies advanced to within 51 kilometers of Ankara, everything rested in the fight that would take place at the banks of the river Sakarya. Mustafa Kemal was there to personally command his troops. In his historic speech, he promised execution to anyone who retreated without his own specific orders. Under Mustafa Kemal's leadership, the Turks were ready to make their stand. After 22 days and nights of fierce fighting, the Greek advance had finally been stopped.
The stand was so successful that not only did the Greeks pull back from the Sakarya, but they never again tried to reach the Sakarya. Instead, they fell back in disorder and never again were a serious threat to the national movement.
Within 2 years of his arrival in Anatolia, Mustafa Kemal was able to open a parliament, recapture Turkish territories in the east and the south, and stop the Greeks. What remained was the last blow against the Greeks and their British sponsors. He was about to become the savior he had always dreamed of. As Mustafa Kemal prepared for his decisive attack against the Greeks, Fikriye, with her unshakable devotion, made a warm home life for him, while many people joined him nightly to discuss his plans for the future of the country. Once, after dinner, Fikriye asked him about marriage. He replied, "I am married to the Turkish nation." After a year of careful planning and total secrecy, Mustafa Kemal decided that August 26, 1922 would be the day of judgment. Gazing down at the front from his headquarters, he ordered the attack. Victory was immediate. With the swift, ferocious attack of the Turkish army, the Greeks were taken by total surprise. Within 3 days, the Greek front commanders were captured. Within 15 days, Turkish troops entered and liberated Izmir, where the Greeks had landed 3 years before. Acknowledged as the savior, Mustafa Kemal was the most powerful, most revered man in the country. He was offered the positions of Sultan and Caliph to sit at the throne of the Ottoman dynasty. But he had other plans in mind. Mustafa Kemal had already decided to abolish the Sultanate at the first possible moment. Again, the Allies would provide the opportunity.
They invited both the Sultan's government in Istanbul and the Turkish nationalist government in Ankara to send a joint delegation to Lausanne to renegotiate the treaty. Well, after having defeated everybody, Mustafa Kemal was not going to share the government of Turkey with the government in Istanbul that had cooperated with the Allies.
Taking advantage of the situation, Mustafa Kemal explained to the delegates that the only government which represented the people and acted on their will was the Ankara government. He proposed to separate the Sultanate from the Caliphate and abolish the former. Heated arguments broke out. At one point, the discussions became so intense as to force Kemal to remark, "If the proposition is not accepted, some heads will be cut off." It was sufficient. The Sultanate was abolished. Ending the anomaly of two governments, Mustafa Kemal turned his eyes to the Lausanne Peace Conference, where his newly appointed foreign minister, Ismet, represented Turkey. After months of deliberation, the Turkish delegation was able to gain Turkey's complete independence in political, economic, and military matters. With this breathtaking pace of diplomacy and politics, Mustafa Kemal's personal life was in considerable confusion. Leaving Fikriye, who suffered from tuberculosis, behind as he led the Great Offensive, he had met and had been impressed by a young woman named Latife in Izmir. Now, he was faced with a choice between the two women.
Fikriye cared for Kemal. She made a home for him, but she was not the model that he wanted for the new Turkish woman. The model was more the one presented by Latife Hanım, who was Western educated, spoke Western languages, and very strong-willed.
Sending Fikriye to Switzerland for therapy, Mustafa Kemal approached Latife and expressed his interest. They were wed shortly afterwards.
It was in Switzerland that Fikriye learns about Ataturk's marriage and comes back to Ankara and shoots herself with a revolver that she had bought to give as a gift to Ataturk and kills herself.
The death of Fikriye, while it must have caused him some emotional distress, he was able to put it behind him very quickly, as he was able to put most things of an unpleasant nature behind him extremely quickly.
Immersing himself back in politics, Mustafa Kemal wasted no time in announcing the proclamation of the Republic on October 29, 1923. Turkey was now referred to as the Republic of Turkey, with Mustafa Kemal as its first president. The Caliphate was next. Mustafa Kemal knew that for Turkey to reach the level of civilization in the rest of the world, it had to be secularized.
He believed in the supremacy of human reason. He wanted Turkey to join the mainstream of human progress. And therefore, knowledge was what he was after.
For many years, the offices of the Caliphate and the Ministry of Religious Affairs had prevented the entrance of knowledge into the country. They had to be removed if Turkey was to proceed forward. After careful planning, he acted on March 3, 1924. Within hours, he abolished the Caliphate and ended the 600-year-old Ottoman dynasty.
It was extremely important because it was, after all, the severing of the link between religion and state and the legitimization of the state. He did not in any way stop the practice of religion anywhere in the country. He didn't mind what people believed, whether they went to a mosque or not, provided they did not undermine the secular state.
Biggest freedom given to Turkish citizens was the law that says this is a secular state.
Unfortunately, success at politics was accompanied by trouble at home.
His relationship with Latifa deteriorated rather quickly. She was not completely in touch with the fact that Mustafa Kemal was not a man who could be run by anybody, especially not by his wife. His habits were not the kind that promoted secure family life. He worked extremely hard. He worked especially late during the night. That kind of lifestyle was not the best lifestyle for a married life, and ultimately they were divorced.
The marriage had lasted 2.5 years. He never remarried.
Mustafa Kemal's instincts were those of the harem, but his mind was a modern mind. And he wanted the emancipation of women, logically, in order to see the country move forward in the company of other civilized states, although in his private life he found it extremely difficult to treat women as equals.
As his own marriage crumbled, Mustafa Kemal began a wave of reforms to emancipate Turkish women, who, during the Ottoman times, had no legal rights and were prohibited to participate in social life.
Atatürk'ün ideali kadınlarımızı da çağa uygun bir şekilde giyinmelerini ve yetişmelerini, her sahada onların bir meslek sahibi olmalarını istiyordu.
Under his strong leadership and encouragement, women became more and more involved in the daily life of the Republic. He legalized the movement by adopting the Swiss Civil Code in 1926, which prevented polygamy and gave women equal rights in marriage. By 1934, 11 years before France, Turkish women had gained the right to vote and be elected into parliament. By 1935, there were 17 women deputies elected.
We, the Turkish women, especially the women, we owe a great deal to Ataturk. We didn't fight for our rights. We were given our rights by him.
Not everyone was content with the reforms. Supporters of the Caliphate felt that Kemal and the country were on the wrong path. Others, close to him, felt that they did not get the promotions they deserved. Building up their resentment, certain opponents planned to assassinate Mustafa Kemal when he was to visit Izmir in 1926. Thanks to an informer, the would-be assassins were arrested before they could act. Mustafa Kemal entered Izmir unharmed, but in a rage.
Izmir assassination attempt was such a threat to his own sense of immortality that he had the man brought to him and identified himself to the man and said, "I'm Mustafa Kemal, you want to kill me?" Gave him his gun and said, "Go ahead." And of course the man didn't dare to do that. But Kemal had to confront this attempt at his life in order to resettle his own sense of his immortality, because it was such an attack on that.
After the trials, 13 people who had been linked to the plot were publicly hanged. All opposition to Mustafa Kemal and his reforms had been silenced. With the conspirators out of the way, Mustafa Kemal turned his eyes to the adoption of a new, pragmatic alphabet, which was easy to learn and would enable the entrance of knowledge into the country. Despite the experts' complaints that 5 years would be needed to adopt the Latin alphabet, he ordered, "It will be done in 3 months or not done at all."
His anxiety to promote education was very personal. I guess he valued the education he had had, which elevated him from a class of ignorant people to a class of understanding and governing people.
Using his charisma and persuasion, Mustafa Kemal convinced the Turkish people that the learning and teaching of the new alphabet was a national task. He toured every corner of the country with a blackboard and taught the new alphabet. The Turkish educational reform had begun with Mustafa Kemal as the head teacher. Thanks to the education reforms, the Arabic alphabet had been completely abandoned, and a new generation of Turks was growing up under the bright lights of freedom and knowledge.
We were brought up in such full confidence that it is still impossible to take away from us that national identity which was given to us by that great man. Because he was our national identity to begin with.
When a law was passed in 1934 stating that every Turk had to adopt a surname, Mustafa Kemal was given the surname of Ataturk, Father Turk.
While the work at hand was extremely serious, Kemal also had a fun side to him. He had a great sense of humor. He always tried to make the workload light for people by engaging them in repartee. It was this capacity to engage in both play and work that enabled him to keep such long hours and enable him to focus on what he was all about.
Turkey's prospects were on the rise by the early 1930s. Eager to show his creation, Ataturk accepted a wave of foreign visitors. Among them were King Edward VIII, King of Jordan, and General Douglas MacArthur, the chief of the American military. During these meetings, Ataturk announced his foreign policy to all his neighbors. Turkey does not desire an inch of foreign territory, but it will not give up an inch of its own. With his nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize by the Greek Prime Minister Venizelos, Ataturk's reputation as a peace-seeking ruler grew outside of the country. Despite his fame and the masses of people around him, Ataturk was lonely. Loving children and trying to create a regular family for himself, he had adopted 8 daughters.
He wanted these young women to become models for the emerging Turkish youth. So he was involved in every aspect of their lives, their schooling, their choice of clothing, the kinds of sports they played, the kinds of careers they would have. The lives of these young girls were his projects.
Ben önce zaten bu mesleğe girdiğim zaman öyle bir eğlence gibi geldi bana. O şekilde böyle kabul ettim belki de. Sonra baktım Atatürk fevkalade ilgileniyor. O kadar ilgileniyor ki o zaman aklım başıma geldi. Dedim ki madem ki böyle Atatürk bunu istiyor, ben mahcup olmayayım ona karşı, milletime karşı da daha ciddi bir tavır takındım. Daha ciddi çalıştım ve işte nihayet sonunda havacı oldum.
In his later years, his youngest adopted daughter, Ulku, became the center of his attention and affection. By 1936, the country was able to progress on its own. Retreating to the presidential palace, the aging Ataturk devoted most of his time to studies of history and language. "Are you happy?" asked a journalist. "I am happy, for I have succeeded," answered Ataturk. Turkish people were working enthusiastically and with great dedication for their leader and the future.
There was more revelation of what he meant to them in the way they did their work, carried on their work, were citizens of the country, than in their discussion of the man.
The son of a customs clerk from Salonika, the special Mustafa, had indeed succeeded. After years of irregular sleeping habits and diet, strenuous work, and alcohol, Ataturk's health began to fail by the beginning of 1937. Suffering from cirrhosis of the liver, he fought the only battle he was destined to lose. As the Turkish nation watched closely, Ataturk's condition deteriorated rapidly despite the efforts of Turkish and foreign doctors. The dreaded moment came on November 10th, 1938.
The Turkish nation has taken care of Mustafa Kemal's immortality. For Turks, he is immortal. He will live forever. It is Mustafa Kemal's memory that they turn to for sustenance at all times.
We all need another Ataturk. I wish many countries in the world today had people with his capabilities and his leadership. There's always a need for Ataturks. That may annoy some people, but I think it's true. I mean, men of outstanding capability, broad vision, and so much charisma all coming together in one individual.
In the job that had to be done, Nobody ever did as well as Ataturk.
Although death removed him from office years ago, because he was a builder for the future, the Turkey of today is still the Turkey of Ataturk.